CEE,
Central Europe Explained,
an IDM podcast series
powered by Erste Group.
Episode 54, Potential of Minilateral Formats. Welcome to Central Europe Explained. My name is Malwina Talik, and I will guide you through today's episode. This time, we'll be talking about minilateral formats in Central Europe. How do they shape the region? What makes them effective? And what potential may remain untapped? Minilateral formats aren't anything new. Think of, for example, Benelux, which has been established already in 1944, or the Visegrad Group, a format dating back to 1991 and originally aiming at accelerating the accession of Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland in NATO and the EU. In recent years, we have seen many new alliances emerging, like the Three Seas Initiative and the Central Five, to name just a few. So what makes them so popular? To explore this topic, I have an excellent expert with me, Romain Le Quiniou. Romain is a French citizen who lived for many years in Central and Eastern Europe. He's also co-founder and managing director of Eurocreative, the first think tank in France focusing specifically on Central and Eastern Europe. Romain, welcome and thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
And before we start talking about minilateral formats, I would like to ask you a more personal question. Could you share with us how did you become interested in Central and Eastern Europe? What sparked your interest? What made you actually found the Eurocreative later on?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. Both people in France, my family, my friends, as well as people in Central Eastern Europe when I was living there, were asking me why a French guy is so interested into Central Europe, right? And the answer was quite simple. When I was in university, basically Maidan happened. And for me, it was a dramatic, of course, event, but also a beautiful way of revolution of people trying to conquer the liberty. And the truth is that as a French student, I didn't know too much about Ukraine. I didn't know too much about basically Central Eastern Europe. And then I wanted to know more. I wanted to go ahead of the simple divisions that we heard in France from politicians, from media. Basically, are you in favor or against Ukraine? Are you in favor or against Russia? And so basically, I wanted to know more. And I started to work on the topic to get more information on Ukraine, but also on Central Eastern Europe. Did some master thesis on Polish strategic culture. Something very difficult for French people was to know why Polish people are so pro-American, pro-USA. So, I was trying to understand a few different topics from Central Eastern Europe, and then I just moved to Poland to begin my professional career after university, and I stayed in Warsaw for 2 years, then moved to Bratislava for 3 years, and traveled quite a lot because of my professional activities in the region, from Tallinn to Sofia and to Ljubljana. So, I covered the region, met a lot of people, had a lot of discussions. And so I consider myself today as a kind of translator of Central Eastern European voices for French audience and vice versa. And with my think tank, basically Eurocreative, what we do is to strengthen mutual understanding between France and Central Eastern European countries.
That's a very interesting path, and I appreciate that you remained on this path. And in Central and Eastern Europe, we are always very appreciative if someone is interested and wants to understand our perspectives, our history. So thank you for sharing this. Now let us move to the topic. And Gloria, our podcast producer, prepared a little game. So that's the surprise. And the rules are as follows. I would say a word, actually a name of a minilateral format. And you share with us your first thought, memory, a word, association. It can be shorter, it can be longer. Anything that comes to your mind. So okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready to play.
Minilateralism.
It's a new format that is gaining traction in international as well as European affairs.
Benelux.
Benelux, a nice way to put together countries with different political orientation and to memorize basically who is part of this region.
Three Seas Initiative.
A very nice idea without very concrete results.
Visegrad Four.
A very old memory because basically we know about the first meeting in the 14th century. But for me, Visegrad, aside the minilateral format, is mostly about my travels from Bratislava to Budapest with the Visegrad Castle on the Danube.
And the last one, Weimar Triangle.
A lasting hope. For the past few months, we thought it was finally the revival of Weimar, and then President Macron decided to dissolve the parliament. So we will see if we can still do something there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Romain. And for those who may not be familiar with the concept of minilateral formats and would like to know what are we talking about today exactly? What's the difference between them and other bigger formats? What would be your Romain's definition of minilateral formats?
Well, I think that the most simple definition I can find for minilateral format is a small-scale cooperation based on shared or mutual interests. I think that minilateral formats are more and more relevant, both in international affairs as well as in the European affairs. We can see it, for example, in Indo-Pacific. I believe it's the region where minilateral formats are the most well-known. We can cite, Quad. We can cite AUKUS, which is quite a frightening memory for French people, to be honest. But also in the European Union, we know that in the Treaty of the European Union, we have this so-called enhanced cooperation, which is basically something that is providing European member states the possibility to use minilateral format to energize mutual processes. I would say that minilateral formats are interesting thing, and we see that it's more and more discussed in academic. Why? Because I believe it's a flexible and innovative approach of diplomacy. It's agile, it's adaptable, it's about pragmatism for the simple reasons that it allows players, actors on the international scale to basically foster fast reaction to crisis, but also to opportunities. And here, some people say that minilateralism could compete or reduce the impact of multilateralism, but I don't believe. I think that in most of the cases, minilateral format can help to boost multilateralism for the simple reason that more and more we can see it in the UN, we can see it in the EU, we can see it in NATO, and we can see that collective decision making is more and more complicated. So you need to sometimes bypass it, and it's not always negative, it's also positive, and find some coalition, ad hoc coalition of countries to basically initiate new proposals that tomorrow can be adopted by the collective institution or players. And I would like to recall one definition which I found quite interesting, and it's from a scholar named Moises Naim. And basically it defines minilateralism by the smallest possible number of countries needed to have the largest possible impact on solving a particular problem. And I think everything is there.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you very much for naming those USP, unique selling points of minilateral formats like flexibility, adaptability, the fast pace. Because we hear so much criticism about those formats very often, that they don't have a clear aim, that the competences overlap. Probably you can also name a few more. What do you think, like how justified are those concerns, or how can we overcome those challenges that are within those minilateral formats?
Well, I think that it's all about pragmatism. And again, on some topics, some challenges, minilateral formats are something that is convenient. Sometimes it's not. One thing I think is important is to keep in mind that minilateral format can be structured in the long way, or just be very pragmatic on one single issue, on one specific time, for the simple reason that minilateral format are about interest. They are not about values. So you can ally with countries where you are not in a strict alliance with, where you didn't cooperate so much about. I can tell you, for example, one specific minilateral format that is very specific. It can lead to new minilateral format or cooperation, but this is something new. It's the cooperation between Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey on demining the Black Sea following the large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think that this is one of the minilateral format where you can find a useful way, but doesn't necessarily means that these three countries are aligned on everything. As a French, I would like to talk also a bit about France. We love to do it, but I think that France did interesting use of minilateral format, and I believe that it's one of the legacy of Macron. As from now, he still has 3 years of mandate. We will see how important these 3 years will be and how much liberty we'll have to define the French foreign policy as we are experiencing, political blockade. But I believe that since 2017, he did use well minilateralism. He used it in Indo-Pacific. Again, this is something interesting. And here you have different context. He used it, for example, for climate change, aligning basically with Pacific small islands. And we cannot say that France has used to have extensive cooperation with these islands, but he needed to find some new actors to raise the voice of this part of the world in the international scale. Same thing at the European level. What Macron basically perceived since 2017 is that European integration is more and more difficult, right? And so what he wanted to do is to make some progress, but he knew in the same time that progress was not able to obtain by including everyone on the table, for the simple reason that consensus is lacking today in European Union when it comes to deeper, faster integration. And so one example is defense area, where he developed basically this so-called European Intervention Initiative, which is a joint military project to enhance strategic culture at the European level. And here he started with 9 member states, and now there are 13, if I'm not mistaken. So again, minilateral format basically is interesting because you can start small and then expand with new actors, with new players, and to reach more impactful decision initiatives and all in all.
Yeah, that's also interesting how they can rebrand themselves and reinvent. And there are sometimes discussions that some formats make no sense in the current form, and maybe we should dissolve them. And then out of a sudden, due to a political situation or unexpected events, they start making sense again. This brings me a little bit back to Central Europe. And I would like to ask you, what is your take on the minilateral formats there? And you have also this external perspective. So you see with a different eye, which we may not see the same way. Which of them do you find most impactful? And which one do you think has the biggest potential to bring about change? And where the potential is maybe still untapped?
First, if I can make some advertising for a colleague of mine, friend of mine, from PISM, which is, this International Affairs Institute from Poland, they just published a very interesting report on regional cooperation and including minilateral format. So I invite people listening to us to refer to this work because it's an interesting one. What I can say is that numerous formats have been, emerging in Central Eastern Europe over the past few years, over the past decades. And I would say to try to generalize a distinction is that these minilateral formats in the 90s were mostly about favoring, about energizing, facilitating is the right word actually, the integration of Central Eastern countries into Euro-Atlantic structures, so the EU and NATO. And it's been very successful. And then I would say that in the 2010s, especially, new minilateral formats emerged, and these ones were mostly focusing on security for the simple reason that these countries from Central Eastern Europe were trying to counter regionally the rising threat of authoritarian Russia. And it was about hard security mainly, but also some aspect of soft security, meaning connectivity, transport, energy, digital, things like this. So a lot of formats, a lot of different initiatives at the minilateral format. And if we want to divide them and to mention a few of them, I would say that first we need to look at geography and size because they are very different. First, we have to look at the regional level. Regional level, we can mention Visegrad Four, so it's about Slovakia, Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. It's a very Central European initiative. We can look at Bucharest 9. Bucharest 9 is basically the eastern flank from the Baltic states to Visegrad states and also Romania and Bulgaria. This format has been created as a very security-focused group, a minilateral format, basically following the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine in 2014. Then we need to look at the sub-regional level. Sub-regional, we can find the Baltic 3, which has been created already in the 1990s, and it was basically tried to reinforce cooperation between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and not to reproduce the mistakes which have been made during the interwar period. And a second one we can mention, which is very interesting for you at IDM, is a Slavkov Triangle, which basically covers Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Austria. Last level where we can find minilateral format is the cross-regional level. And here we have the Three Seas Initiative from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea to the Adriatic Sea. And we can also mention a very interesting one, which is very often overlooked, which is the Nordic-Baltic cooperation. And it's very important these days for the large-scale invasion of Russia. And the second aspect I wanted to mention maybe is about the structuration of this minilateral formats, because they are very different. If we take V4, Visegrad 4, for example, we can see that there is rotative presidency, so there is a bit of a structure, there is a bit of coordination, there is continuation of the work year after year, and there is one thing that is very interesting, which is the International Visegrad Fund, which is basically providing opportunities to civil society, education, to have some projects which reinforce the cooperation between a different level of actors within the Visegrad region. We can talk also about the Baltic 3, and here there is parliamentary coordination based on a Nordic model, which is basically trying to gather parliamentarians and to act together in a coordinated way, which is even more structured than the previous one. If we take the Bucharest 9, it's mostly about consultations, not a lot of structuration, basically meetings before NATO to coordinate the positions between the different Central Eastern member states before important strategic meetings. It led to some success. For example, they were able to advocate for the needs to, send brigades to the Baltic states a few years ago. And the last one, it's a new one that we haven't mentioned yet, is Lublin Triangle, which basically gathers Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine. And here there is a military aspect, a military component, because in this format there is a military brigade, for example, multinational military brigade. So this is how I will differentiate a few formats, a few minilateral formats from Central Eastern Europe. But you asked me also to evaluate this format, so I will try briefly to cover that. And I think that here, these formats are part of the regional landscape today, and it's helped in three ways. The first one is about to influence the voice, to basically try to strengthen the voice of Central Eastern European countries in order to influence structures such as NATO or the EU. And here I can give you a new minilateral format that is useful for that. For example, the Polish-Baltic cooperation. And here it was very important for these countries to coordinate and influence the EU when it comes to the response to the so-called hybrid threat from Belarus, when it comes to this migration flux that were destabilizing these countries. A second aspect is about coordination of positions. We already say that. And then it's about maximizing regional interests. And here we can cite the Three Seas initiatives, which is trying to gather these countries and try to allocate more resources, especially financial, to boost infrastructures in the country, be it transport, be it energy security, about digital and things like this. And to conclude on this question, I don't want to be too long. I know I am already too long. I think that this minilateral format brings something to the region. Because we know it's a region made of different countries, mostly small to mid-sized countries, if we refer to the European Union, which have some influence, but some others lacks influence in the region. And it's very important for them to coordinate, to have more voice, to be heard in Brussels, to be heard in Washington. And I think on this, the coordination and the consultations in these formats are very useful. But what we can say, especially if we look at formats such as Tricid Initiative, which are very innovative on paper, but there is a lack of concrete results coming up from these formats. And it needs to be emphasized. These formats are useful, but they can be even more useful.
Yeah, that's a great evaluation in a nutshell. And what would be the minilateral format in Central Europe that you keep following the most?
Well, I think two of them are very important to follow. The first one, I think, is Visegrad Four, for the simple reason that when we look at Visegrad Four, we look at the most important problem of minilateral format, which is about political changes. And here we have to say that Visegrad Four has been an efficient format for many years, but in the few last years, it was quite difficult for the simple reason that political behaviors, political positions from some of the members of this minilateral format are very much different. First one was the division of the members of Visegrad 4 when it came to rule of law and European integration. And here, for a number of years, we had Orban Viktor and PIS from Poland being very antagonistic to the two other members of the format, which were Czech Republic and Slovakia. So you had many divisions between these two states, and it made the cooperation much more difficult, especially when it comes to V4 positions towards EU integration, European affairs. They made it possible to align on migration, but for example, when it came to values, when it came to democratization of Europe, they were not on the same page. Much more problematic, I would say, is about foreign policy. And here we have to say that Orban and his allies from Fidesz have developed for the last few years a pro-Russian policy, a pro-Russian attitude, and especially a position that is very much hostile to Ukraine. And, this rhetoric of pro-peace, which is indeed a politics of appeasement, which is equaling to the search for the end of the war through a capitulation of Ukraine, which is not acceptable for Poland and Czech Republic, and which was not acceptable to Slovakia before the last parliamentary election back in autumn 2023. So as of today, Visegrad 4 is still cut into Poland and Czech Republic today versus Hungary and Slovakia. What about tomorrow? We don't know, because we know that elections will come in Czech Republic, and we might have the return of former Prime Minister Babiš to power, and then the balance could shift towards Orban. So the problem of Visegrad 4 is really this problem of politics, of different positions, and it can make the format more and more irrelevant, I would say. If you look at the last presidencies from Poland, this is the ongoing one, and the last one from Czech Republic, frankly speaking, the presidency work right now is mostly about subtopics. It's about cultural exchanges. It's about very small achievement possible. And so it's not an efficient format anymore. So we hope that maybe we will come back to a more efficient format, pro-European, of course. The second one I would say is the Bucharest 9, because I'm sure that security is going to stay as a major topic for Eastern flank for Central Eastern European countries in the next few years. And the question is mostly to know how Bucharest 9 can evolve. And I think that there are a few orientations. How can they be more influential within the EU and within NATO? The thing that they did over the past 2 years, how can they continue to do it in the next few years? One possibility is to develop and try to reinforce cooperation with Nordic countries, especially Sweden and Finland, now that they are part of NATO. I think this is one of the continuation that is possible, especially that the relationship between Nordic and Baltic is already quite extensive, and there is willingness to do it. And the second one is also, do they want to stay only on hard security and only, on coordination of security interest? Knowing once again that Hungary is a problematic player here. Do they want to stay on hard security? I do believe that also adding some components of kind of soft security and especially economic security is very important, especially at a time when not only Russia is threatening to Europe and the transatlantic space, but also China. And I believe that Central Eastern European countries here have a voice to be heard also on economics, also on the influence of China in the region, economically speaking. So there's all the two formats I would follow.
You have mentioned also the future, and that because of the political positions, changing governments, the dynamic of the format can change. So let's move to the future. Do you think that in the next 10 years, we will experience new minilateral formats being established, being founded, or that are there now, we'll have to rebrand them, change? Will we have more of them? Will we have fewer of them, to put it shortly?
So, of course, in the next 10 years, politics will be important. If you look, for example, at a format like Slavkov, which is kind of irrelevant over the past 2-3 years, but still, it can be revived for one simple reason. If you have, stars being aligned between politicians in the three countries that are on the same page. Today, Slovakia is run by Mr. Fico. Tomorrow, Austria could be run by FPÖ, and after tomorrow, to put it this way, Babiš could come back to Czech Republic. And then you would have some kind of axis of cooperation between illiberals in the next few years. And then it could be a way to reinvigorate basically Slavkov. That's, kind of drama scenario. In the same time, you can have a positive change in Visegrad Four. We already talked about this. More generally, once again, I do believe that in the next 10 years, security will be predominant in the region, and so will be predominant in the constitution and in the functioning of this minilateral formats. And once again, focus on benign. But if I want to make some perspective, I would say that probably two topics could be interesting to explore when it comes to the development of minilateral format in Central Eastern Europe. The first one is about EU enlargement. Visegrad Four used to be this minilateral format that is used to talk and to develop EU enlargement. It was about consultations, it was about common position at the EU level, but it was also about concrete actions, which was development of civil society, help for governance, democratic practices, economic investments, all in all. Here today is a bit more difficult, again, for Visegrad because of a specific position of Hungary towards Ukraine, but I do believe that it's important to have a minilateral format, to use one that already exists or to create a new one, to revive the support of Central Eastern Europe towards enlargement to the Western Balkans, as well as enlargement to, this Eastern Partnership countries, and especially the trio, as we call it, Ukraine, Moldova, and if politics evolve favorably in Georgia. Here it's very important, I do believe, and there is one thing that is important if we take Ukraine and Moldova, it's about Ukraine reconstruction. And here we need to think strategically Ukraine reconstruction in link with EU enlargement. And here it's not just about, hard security, it's also about soft security. It's about energy, it's about infrastructures, it's about logistical hubs, and such format can help with key countries such as Poland and Romania. Second, for the Western Balkans, I do believe that it's important to perceive Western Balkans as a wider region, not only Western Balkans. And here, countries such as Romania, Greece, Slovenia, Croatia, Austria have a role to play in creating a new minilateral format to revive and to process positively with the process of enlargement. And the second topic is about European Union foreign policy. And here we know that Central Eastern European countries have been focused on the eastern flank, but they need also to contribute to other theaters, right? Because all theaters are linked with the threats of authoritarian regimes such as China or Russia. And here, I believe that it's important that these countries also participate to European initiatives when it comes to reaching the global south. So we can find some ways for them to develop minilateral format to make their voice heard. And it concludes on my final point, which is basically we need also to think about the development of Central Eastern European engagement with Western European states. And here it's about minilateral format. We have this example of Weimar format, France, Germany, Poland, but we need also to think about new ideas. And here I just have one. It's about security, it's about the eastern flank, and it's basically about a cooperation between France, the UK, Romania, and Poland in order to ensure a revitalization of European security from the Baltic Sea through the Black Sea, with the two main actors when it comes to European defense. So coordination between the two main players in Central Eastern Europe, Poland and Romania, with the two most important military powers on the European continent. And of course, this format should be influential in the European Union, but also and especially in NATO.
Reflecting on what you said throughout this episode, I think that we will really see the rise of a minilateral formats rather than decrease, right? Because if we think about the times we live in from the European perspective, that there are more and more unprecedented challenges, then actually these formats deliver the answer and have capacities that we need. I think that they are with us to stay with us still for a long time and probably be even more. We are coming slowly to the end of this episode, but there is always one question that our podcast producer likes to ask, and this is about a piece of art. Could you recommend us a book or a movie or a painting that is related to the topic that we talked about, and you would recommend to our listeners?
So yes, that's an interesting exercise, right? I struggled a bit, but I found something, and I would like to choose a painting, which is from Pierre-Auguste Renoir, which is called in English The Luncheon of the Boating Party. And why I do that is because you can see on this painting a few people, about a dozen of people, talking, drinking, eating, a very French way of having, a small reunion. And I think that it's full of nice and kind atmosphere. And I think this is about minilateral formats, right? It's about talking in a positive atmosphere about concrete solutions. And if you do that in small circle with a positive attitude, with people you already know, and you know that you want to find common solutions, then it's possible to find innovative solutions from the problem you are facing together. And of course, as a French, if you add a bit of red wine, it's even more perfect.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a very positive comparison. I think this painting will be stuck with me now for a very long time.
Minilateral formats with red wine is, the thing.
Nothing can go wrong, right? Romain, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will too. I've also learned so much from you. So thanks for sharing your expertise and your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for your invitation.
This was CEE, Central Europe Explained, a podcast series produced by the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe. If you enjoyed listening to us, make sure to subscribe to the IDM podcast series on your favorite podcast platform. Additionally, you can explore our other work on our website www.idm.at. If you have any feedback or if you're interested in collaborating on a podcast episode, please do not hesitate to contact us through our social media channels at IDM Vienna or write us an email to idm@idm.at.
IDM Podcast.
Institut für den Donauraum und Mitteleuropa.
Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe.
European perspectives.
Regional actions.
Cooperation and expertise since 1953.